and by the way, I know some students have financial reasons and you have to help take care of grandma and grandpa or younger siblings. So this is very complicated, and I don't want to pretend otherwise.
Yes.
But you know, I feel most for students who work really hard and do okay, but because they're spread so thin, they end up graduating, but their grades are just not good enough. Not bad, but just not good enough to make the cutoff for employers to interview them. Just not good enough to make the cutoff to be accepted into graduate school or medical school or law school. Just not good enough to attract kind of attention that students that do a little bit more and have a few more credentials and a few more experiences are able to get. And this is where I think a lot of students become frustrated because they feel like, well, I just finished my bachelor's degree and I'm working at T-Mobile. With perfectly honorable work, of course.
Yes.
But I think that's the real difference is you want to worry about the basics. Obviously, you want to do well grade-wise, but you also want to invest time in volunteering in the community, being a leader in student organizations, in some fields, depending on your profession, working with professors on research projects that will help you develop skills and also, by the way, get you positive attention when you apply for medical school, law school, graduate school. So these things are not easy to do, but I tell students, number one, not thinking about it or thinking somehow it'll all work out doesn't really help. And number two, especially since I work with freshman and sophomore students primarily, I tell them, you know, all this effort to learn all these soft skills is going to take a certain amount of work. You can't get around that. But imagine spreading that work out over 3 or 4 years instead of trying to decide, well, I'm a freshman, I'm just going to focus on classes, I don't know what's going on, let me just survive this first year. And then you're a sophomore. Well, I'm a sophomore, I'm still kind of getting these things, let me survive the second year. And then you're trying to cram everything in terms of your career preparation into a year or 2 years when you could have started as a freshman and been able to spread it out over a longer time.
Yeah, and it's not as overwhelming.
Exactly.
Sorry. I remember when I was a freshman and I did not think that, since I was never in anything in high school, like no clubs, no sports, nothing, I was just like doing homework, going home, you know, just the 4 years, it was like that. It was kind of the same mindset when I came to college. And I did not see kind of the relevance of like joining organizations or like going to and use the university's resources. I was just like, I'll do the same thing. I'll do my homework, go home, and like same thing every day. And now that I'm a senior, like I do see the difference I made, and I think luckily for me, I kind of realized like at the beginning of junior year, so I was able to kind of add something, you know, extra to my resume, or you know, kind of network more around the university. And I think right now I'm kind of like at a good place, not the best, but good place. And so yeah, it's super important to like add those stuff like into your freshman sophomore year.
Yeah, being complacent is something that's easy, and I think that relates to what you said, that students, they don't want to put the effort freshman year, sophomore year. They're complacent with their grades, with just surviving, as you said. So instead of focusing on just being complacent and doing the minimum effort, you recommend for students to spread out their work and do a little bit freshman year, do something sophomore year, and increasing maybe the difficulty of what they're doing to challenge themselves to become the best versions of themselves.
Right, and I think if you like anything, the skills, the abilities you need to be a leader in an organization or to be a leader in some community volunteer effort. You know, imagine if your freshman year you volunteer for a beach cleanup, and then your second year, just to use one example because it's something we all know, all of us around here grew up doing beach cleanups. In your first year you volunteer, you're a worker bee for the beach cleanup, and that helps the community. I mean, it's a good thing.
Yes.
And then the second year maybe you volunteer to be a captain, meaning one of the people that helps hand out all the supplies and check them in when they come back.
Being the leader.
Right. And then maybe third year, you might volunteer to be an assistant coordinator. So before even the day starts, you're helping other people call all the folks that go, or I guess for text the text folks, remind them, okay, we're going to meet at Isla Blanca Park at 9 a.m. And then maybe by your fourth year, you will have enough experience and confidence, and whoever the organizers are will trust you. You can be in charge. So, you know, you're kind of moving up through incremental steps. One other quick point I want to make, though, just to be clear with our listeners, is I do not want to let professors off the hook. One criticism I have for my fellow professors about all this stuff is that a lot of times, because we think we know why stuff matters that we do, whether it's teaching or other stuff we do at the university, we often take it for granted. And I encourage my colleagues to not have that attitude. In other words, I've had many students, for example, business majors ask, why do I have to take art classes? I want to be a business major. I want to be a high school science teacher. Why do I have to take math classes? I want to go to medical school. Why do I have to take history classes? There are answers to those questions. The students may disagree, and that's okay. But there are reasons why universities do what they do. And similarly, in terms of being active about developing these soft skills, I think faculty need to take a role in helping our students think about this stuff too. To put it another way, I view it as very literally Mad Men 1960s for professors to be like, you're going to come in and take my class, whether psychology, math, whatever, sit down and shut up. I'm going to talk because I know all the stuff, and then you take a midterm and a final and everybody goes home. Number one, I don't think that's the best way to teach. And number two, I think that doesn't help students understand how to make connections. And so when I teach students, and I won't pretend that I've got this perfect because I don't, but when I teach, I try and help them understand, here's how today's idea could matter to you.
Okay.
I don't know your life. I'm not going to pretend that I know all the answers about your life because it's your life. But when we study motivation, here's why I think this is important for you to understand this as a college student, but also, by the way, for the rest of your life. When we study personality, here's why I think this is important for you as a college student, sure, short term, but also for the rest of your life. Understanding personality, understanding others' personalities can help you, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I guess my takeaway to that is this is a complicated endeavor. Students are not and shouldn't feel like they're in it alone. I think faculty have a role to play beyond just the basic teaching, as important as that is, and also helping students understand how do all these pieces fit together. Because I had professors do that for me, and so I try to kind of pay it forward. But again, it's not just about everybody feeling good and singing songs together. I think it benefits students' lives, and that benefits society.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right.
That's so true.
I like that. It's part of seeing why we're doing what we're doing. So it's, I think, a very good way to kind of visualize why am I even going to college, or why am I taking all these classes, as you mentioned. So when talking about the university, I would like to ask you, I know that you talk to students regularly, so what are some of the resources that you recommend students to take advantage of? There's a lot of resources in the university. Which ones would you say that are the most important ones?
Well, before I give you a straight answer, I want to give you a pre-answer if I can, because I think this again goes to kind of the mindset that students want to have. Yeah. And the mindset is, I always warn students that feelings of certainty are an emotional reaction. We may not think of certainty. Oh, I know that person is Joe because I met him at my neighbor's barbecue 2 weeks ago. Oh, I know that is a bird called the hummingbird because someone told me years ago that bird's a hummingbird. Yes. Certainty has a rational component, or other parts of our brain, not to get psychological, that are involved. But ultimately, feelings of certainty are really rooted in emotion. The point to that is, I tell my students, the more certain you feel about something, the more you know that you're having an emotional response. So you need to be very cautious. And in student terms, or to go to your question, Claudia, about challenges, when students feel like, oh, I was born to be a medical doctor, I was born to be a nurse, I was born to be an architect, that certainty is not a bad thing, but it does have an emotional component. Yes. So you need to make sure, as I tell students, do you like the idea of being a medical doctor, or do you want to be a medical doctor? Yeah. Because those two things aren't the same. Yeah. Do you like the idea of being a nurse, or do you like nursing? Because those are not the same. Do you like the idea of being a certified public accountant, or do you like accounting? Because they're not the same. So to give you a straight answer, I think if you have the mindset of I want to kind of literally double, triple check myself to make sure that I know what I know, and that any misunderstandings or areas where I kind of don't have the best understanding, that I'm comfortable with that. Again, students are here to study. You're not expected to know everything. Yes. So a number one thing I tell students is take advantage of the Learning Center.
Okay.
I think even students with great grades can often benefit from visiting the Learning Center, which, just to remind the audience, is where they can get both structured tutoring. So UTRG's Learning Center, for example, works with a number of departments that offer, that have classes that are known to be challenging. So we know college algebra has a lot of students who struggle. We know chemistry 1 and 2 have a lot of students who struggle.
Yes.
Another maybe 4 or 5 courses. So in many cases, if you're in certain courses, there are often scheduled tutoring sessions just for those courses and for those professors. So the tutors have their syllabi. They know what textbook they use. They know this week's lesson, next week's lesson, last week's lesson. So students can go to the Learning Center and get help on specific concrete stuff for many of their classes, but also just in general. If they're taking a class that may not have a structured tutoring session, but they're taking a physics class with a lot of math, and they struggle with the algebra part of a lot of physics equations, they can get help with that. Our Learning Center also offers a lot of skills-based tutoring for students who want to learn time management, different study skills, reading strategies. I talk in my classes about what I call the brute force approach, which is my term for the technique that a lot of students come out of high school with, which is, okay, next week I have a midterm in government. It's going to be over 5 chapters. So my study strategy is to read the first chapter of the 5 from beginning to end, and then I'm going to read the second chapter, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and when I finish the 5th, go back to the first one, read it, reread it, reread it, reread it. But the problem with this brute force approach is, well, there are many problems, and I won't bog us down with the details, but suffice to say there are better approaches that can be used.
Yes.
And this is how I try and hook my students, by the way. I'll tell them, some of these ideas are not just fat old professors making stuff up. They can actually help you learn better and, at the same time, spend less time studying.
Yeah.
So if I can hook students with that, then usually they'll pay attention to the next bit.
Yeah.
And this is why the Learning Center is a good example of helping students learn skills, even if you've been successful up to now. Some students, in fact, I'm going to say a majority of students, even especially the ones that have been successful, come out of K-12 with this brute force approach. And there's inevitably a point where that breaks down. I've had students who were valedictorians, salutatorians out of high school that did achieve what they achieved, which is noteworthy. I mean, I'm certainly not diminishing someone being a salutatorian or a valedictorian, but that brute force approach is easier to get by in high school. At some point in college, especially if you want to go to graduate school, medical school, it's going to break down. Our human minds just cannot cram that much stuff in them. And cramming, by the way, is a good way to forget things. You may keep stuff circling around in what we call short-term memory long enough to take your test. But once the test is over, all that stuff goes poof because you never really learned it. You just stuck it in your short-term memory long enough to spit it out in the test.
I saw a video about that, and the best method was that you should learn a little bit, then take a break. And the longer you take a break, you can take even a week, and then again see that same piece of information. It's going to stay in your long-term memory.
Right. But the trick is, of course, if you don't have that week in between, then you won't ever have that effect. And if students are waiting till the last minute, the night before a test or whatever, to start studying, they just don't have the time. You can't travel in time. So that's where students get stuck. So the Learning Center is an important resource, I think. It's challenging sometimes to get students to go there. And I would discourage our listeners from having this attitude. Some students feel like it's remedial. So they feel like they're a bad person or a bad student if they go. And I guess I understand where that may come from, but I certainly don't agree. Also, another challenge many students, well, actually many humans, not just to pick on students, have, is, all of us have weaknesses that we may not talk about at parties, but we know what they are.
Yeah.
But a big challenge many students have is weaknesses they don't know they have. For example, I'll have many students admit that they're terrible at procrastination. They put things off to the last minute. Whether that's good or bad is another debate, but my point is, if you put things off to the last minute, you're going to be aware of it. You may still struggle to change it, but you know what you're doing. If you have I shouldn't use that word. If you have poor reading strategies, reading comprehension, it's hard to know that, because to you, and I'm going to use an extreme example, but I've seen this in students, to you, rereading the same paragraph 5 times before you understand what it's saying may seem normal, but that's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad. Doesn't mean you're a bad person or something wrong with you, but you probably have reading comprehension strategies that are not the best.
Yeah.
And that's something you can be trained out of. You can be trained to do that better. But if you're not aware that it's a challenge, of course, it's difficult to get people to accept it.
So it takes introspection to know what you're doing wrong.
Right. And of course, to be open to correction. And it's tough for everyone.
Yeah, it is tough, yeah.
But the Learning Center is a good example of a place where you can, again, as I said earlier, if there's stuff you you misunderstand, the Learning Center can help you correct that. The Advising Center, I think, is also kind of underutilized. A lot of students associate it with registration time. Oh, I've got to register for these stupid classes, and if I don't see an advisor, then they won't let me register until later, and I don't want my classes to be at 8 o'clock on Saturday, so let me go to the... and of course, that's an important part of it. I understand from a student's perspective, having your schedule worked out is important. But the advisors also have a lot of information to share about different career paths you can follow, different courses, especially as students get into their junior senior year, and I'm sure y'all can relate. Not every accounting major, not every nursing major, not every psychology major has to have 100% the identical experience, right? There are electives or minors you can select. There's stuff you can do. So I think the Advising Center is really important. And then finally, I think another area where all students would benefit, even if you are strong, you can still get stronger, is the Writing Center. That's a challenge a lot of students have. Again, they may not have an awareness of their level of writing strength. And I think that, the communication piece is so vital for any career path. That's, the simplest, not simple, but simplest compared to other things students can do, I think, to really make themselves more attractive to employers is improving their writing skills. Because if you improve your writing, I think that kind of feeds out to your other communication abilities. And you've got, if students don't know, just as an example, the Writing Center, the tutors are mostly seniors and a lot of master's students in English, in writing, in composition. So you basically have experts in the area who can work with you on papers and different projects, and they're available just for you to walk in. And that's not something you'll have, most of your life. When you're outside of college, you don't have these resources available to you. So I encourage students to know what's out there and to also take advantage of it.
I personally, I think I've been to the Writing Center maybe like twice in my whole college experience. I probably should have gone more. I know that as a student you feel like, oh, I don't have time, like I'll just go home and like practice or, do it how I am used to doing it. But the resources are there to make literally your college experience easier, and you should take advantage of those. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that we sometimes, when visiting maybe a different department, we see it as discouraging for a student, because personally I think I'm the best writer, I'm a good writer, but deep down maybe I'm not. So maybe going to a Writing Center will open my mind and it'll give me the knowledge and tools to know what I'm doing wrong and where I can get better, and that'll help me in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
So all these departments that are underused, they're actually there to make us everything easier. So why not just go there?
And at least us as a career center, we're like more than happy when we can actually feel that we help the student. Like sometimes students go, or especially me, when I would go to other resources, I felt like I would come out the same way. I would be like the same as confused, the same as
or even more confused.
Or even more confused, right? But as a career center department, we truly want students to feel like they've been helped and feel like they gain some knowledge about their career and all of that. Would you like to close off with the last question for this podcast?
Well, the last question would be: what is a habit you encourage students to develop that will help them throughout their career journey?
I know we talked about a lot of stuff, right?
Well, actually, I think the advice I would give is pretty simple, but I also admit following that advice for anyone, including myself, can be hard. Yes. So the advice is don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay. I think that's the number one thing I would encourage students, because if you're not afraid to ask for help, well, actually, let me take a step back. So just to be clear again, to separate my one person's experience or opinions from the research, because I am a psychologist. We have a lot of research that whether it's in school or in the workplace, people who are more likely to ask for help are more likely to have better outcomes. Meaning students who are more likely to ask for help or open to asking for help when they feel like they need it tend to have better grades, higher GPAs in the workplace. If you interview bosses and ask them, what's the top 5 characteristics of good employees? So think of all your employees, the best, like the top, 10%, 25%. What stuff do they do? And so employers themselves will tell you that asking for help, seeking guidance is something that they really value, because when you ask for help, you are not just doing the obvious, which is, please help me with this. In other words, you're getting assistance with a particular problem, although that's important, but you're also acknowledging that you understand the limits of your own understanding. An example that I use in my teaching is, God forbid you have a loved one who's in a car accident and they go to the ER. And it happens that day there's 2 ER doctors that are there, that, one's in one room, one's in the other, and, depending on where the EMTs take a left or right, that's where your loved one's going to end up. So doctor number 1 is very conscious about what he knows. He's had a lot of training, but he also understands he doesn't know everything. He's an ER doctor. He's not a radiologist. He's not an orthopedic surgeon. He's not a dermatologist. He knows his specialty.
Yes.
Doctor number 2, hey, I have an MD. I'm a smart guy. How hard could it be? Just make stuff up as they go along. Who would you rather have treating your loved one? The ER doctor who is smart, well trained, but knows he doesn't know everything, or the ER doctor who's, I want to make stuff up as they go along. I'm a smart guy. I have an MD. How hard could it be? I think most of us would choose someone who had some humility and who understood the limits of their knowledge. Yeah. And so I think, to get to the why of stuff, yes, when we ask for help, part of it, of course, is I have a problem right now that I would like help with. That's important, of course. Please help me understand the directions of the assignment. Please help me understand the directions you gave me, boss, for this project that I'm supposed to work on. So in the moment, sure, that's very important. But you're also displaying a mindset, and not just displaying, but hopefully you have the mindset that I don't know everything. And sometimes I need other humans to help me figure stuff out. And that's okay. Yeah. And by the way, that's never gonna end. Yeah. There's always going to be circumstances where we will need other people to help us, and hopefully vice versa. Yes. But I think if students can leave college with that mindset, besides, again, the short-term benefit of getting help for stuff, of course, I think also it'll help them develop the mindset of, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to get assistance, and that doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm doing or that I'm less than other people. It just means this particular thing, I need a little bit of extra assistance or guidance. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's very true. Sometimes we fear rejection or we feel like we're bad students for asking for help, but on the contrary, it just opens our mind.
Yeah, I think that as humans, we feel like asking for help is
like a sign of weakness.
Weakness, maybe, or especially, I think like us as students and like joining or like entering this different like adult life, we tend to feel like being compared to others a lot. And so if you see somebody else that is able to talk to other people like super simple, or like able to get guidance and understand it and then apply it, you feel like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to do that, so it's better if I just kind of do my own research on the side and try to figure things out. But I mean, like I said, we're there for them, and we're there to help them, guide them into, a better student.
Yeah, we could be that student. We could be in the same position. We are going to be in the same position someday, maybe someplace else. So helping others, we help ourselves.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's another example of misknowing. It's it's part of human nature to feel like people think we don't know what we're doing, or maybe we're not that smart. Having that fear, having that concern just means you're human. I mean, that's just part of who we are.
Yeah.
But as I tell my students, it's natural for us as humans, as a species, it's natural for us to die in our 30s of an infection, right? Our ancient ancestors evolved to, I would be like a great-grandfather in ancient times. So, natural doesn't necessarily mean the best. Yeah, all of our technology, all of our science, all of our learning, including learning about human behavior, psychology, if we use that to our advantage, this is where we get the SpaceX's and the COVID vaccine in 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So not to make things too grandiose, but it's natural to have fear about certain things. That just means you're human.
I think
But
it's good
what
to,
you choose to do with that, right? What's the next step you take beyond that? That's sort of the thing that really will.
You think you can use fear as motivation?
Well, that's actually a question. I guess the answer I would give is you have to learn to make a distinction between fear and danger. Danger can exist, right? If I'm walking down the street and I see an 18-wheeler lose control and start to swerve around, I'm probably in danger. I want to make sure that I'm not standing in the street if that 18-wheeler is gonna dump over on top of me. So danger can certainly exist, and I would never pretend otherwise. But fear is an emotional response to the world around you. And we wouldn't have police officers or fighter pilots or soldiers or teachers that work in dangerous schools if we couldn't control that fear. That doesn't mean the danger doesn't exist, but we can have some choice or some control over how we react to it. And again, that's not easy to do. I won't pretend otherwise. Like anything, it takes time and effort and motivation. But sometimes we think of motivation as something we have to find or seek out. If I just have someone walk by and splash motivation on me, everything will work out. And again, that's a natural way of thinking. But what I challenge my students or anyone is actually to reverse that. If you can learn how to find motivation on your own, then that's how you are able to accomplish things. And again, it's very hard. I've just during COVID, for example, I've struggled somewhat in my teaching, especially when we were all 100% online, because my students will log into Zoom, and I know that even though I know they have their own individual lives, their own individual challenges, and all the stuff they're trying to deal with in the middle of everything else, sitting in my office in front of the computer with 28 black boxes, it can be hard to get motivated to teach.
Yes.
And so I understand, and the students obviously are going to have trouble being motivated to learn for obvious reasons.
That's very true.
But if we can all keep in mind sort of what we're trying to get out of this and help each other and try and understand everyone's right. Stay on the path, understand that everyone is having a challenge, and I struggle with this every day. As I said earlier, I don't want to pretend I know my students' lives because I don't. But I know how humans work pretty well, or at least in a general sense. And as much as I can apply to my student situations to help them kind of solve their own problems and also be able to develop to do what they want to do, that's a win for me. So that's kind of that's sort of what motivates me.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
I think we have learned a lot today. It's been a whole process. As we said, the topic today was paving the path towards a bright future. And I think we pretty much cover what are the tips, what are the recommendations, what are some things to think about in your college experience, and
the correct mindset, which resources we can have, all of that we discussed. And I think students right now, what they're hearing, they're gonna be very pleased to know that there are a lot of resources and we're here to help.
Yeah, something that they can relate to more than anything. Thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate it. I think it's been a great experience to do this, and we also feel very, very honored for you to be our first guest. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sabila.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, cut. Let me cut.
So are y'all